Hi, I'm
Hello.
Tobias from Musikfestival Bern, and I'm here with Marc Weidenbaum. Marc, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You are the editor and writer of disquiet.com, which is one of the longest standing music websites on the internet, I think. And you're also the founder of the Disquiet Junto, a project of weekly calls that's been running for over 10 years now. Um, Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to writing for your website and how the Junto came about and what it is?
Sure. Thanks so much for the invitation. This is the fifth year that the Junto has collaborated with Musikfestival Bern, and it's always a pleasure. When I got out of college in the late '80s, I wanted to be a professional music critic, and there were a few magazines I wanted to write for, and I was fortunate that one of those writing opportunities turned into a full-time job. So I moved to California from New York, and I was an editor full-time for 7 years at this music magazine that used to be run by Tower Records before it went out of business. And in '96, long before it went out of business, but in '96 I left. And within a month of leaving the job, I realized how much of my sense of myself had actually been tied up in that job. And I missed being able to say Marc from Pulse. And so I wanted to say Marc from something. And so I created my own website. And this is in 1996, toward the end of the year. So it was only a couple months after I left that I actually bought the URL and got going. And for from '96 till about 2007, it was what eventually became known as a blog. The word blog apparently didn't hit till about '99, so about 3 years later.
Mm.
And I remember when I started adding like date lines to things. It's funny to think how what ancient history this is, but it still feels very fresh to me. But
Mm.
anyhow, the transition was pretty smooth. From '96 to about 2007, it was a pretty much straight up blog. And then at some point, I started collaborating with musicians. It's a longer story, but the short version is I started sending out creative prompts to musicians to participate. And then after about 5 years, I reached this point where I wanted to just try something a little more chancy. And so rather than directly inviting people, I started sending out prompts more generally, inviting anyone who wanted to participate, excuse me, to join in. And the first one of these I sent out truly broadly was the first week of January 2012. I didn't know if anyone would participate. I mean, I would have been disappointed, but not surprised if zero things happened. But in fact, almost 70 musicians from around the planet replied with a track. And we've
Wow.
been doing it every single week since.
So the way it works is every Thursday you're sending out a little assignment, right? And then people
Yeah.
have the opportunity to send in their own interpretation of that assignment until Monday, the week after that.
Yeah, exactly. The structure is that I send out compositional prompts, so they're not. It's not like pieces of music, and it's not the same thing every week. They vary really widely, as you know. And every Thursday, shortly after midnight these days, the prompt goes out automatically on my website. And then when I wake up in the morning, I send out an email. And then people have until 11:59 p.m. the following Monday, their time, to upload a track. Most do it to SoundCloud, but some do it to Bandcamp and YouTube and sometimes multiple places.
So from these prompts, there also grew the need for a forum where people could discuss that music, and that's where a lot of the behind the scene action, or you could actually say center stage action of the projects is taking place. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I started the Junto, part of the reason I wanted to do it is because I became convinced of this idea, which that frequently the most commonly received wisdom, there's maybe an error in it because it's so commonly received that we don't probe it enough. And one of those is the idea that music is the universal language. And I became increasingly convinced that while it is the universal language, it's actually one that musicians speak better than other people. And in fact, I came to wonder if maybe musicians primarily speak music and that conversing isn't necessarily for a lot of musicians
Mm.
the way they communicate, and maybe it's best that they primarily communicate via music. So when I first started the Junto, the idea was it came out of this idea that when I was writing about music, conversing with musicians about ideas was often more interesting to me than just pursuing them on my own. So sitting on a laptop to pursue an idea is one thing, interviewing musicians another. But then when I started presenting the idea in front of musicians for multiple musicians to pursue the same concept, and then communicate with each other primarily through music and hear each other's music, that was just next level. And then some musicians do like to communicate verbally. And so having a forum, first on SoundCloud, later on the music community that goes by the name Lions, and also we have a Slack and people conversed on Twitter. This dispersed conversation can be really interesting. But in many ways, I feel like the ways that the musicians hear each other's tracks and consider the same concepts to really be the focus of the quote conversation.
Mm. So I think 5 years ago, in my second year of working for the music festival, I approached you about whether you'd be interested in doing collaborative calls centered around the festival's topic each year. And I'm really happy that we've been doing this now for 5 years with 15 calls altogether. And I mean, it must be, I don't know, 500 or more pieces sent in. This year, the French composer Eliane Radigue is one of the main, one of the big names that we're featuring in the festival, and we hosted a series of 3 calls earlier this year that were inspired by her work. When you have a topic or a name to work with, how do you approach formulating the prompt? Is it very strict? Is it very loose?
They come in various ways. It's almost better to say what I don't do, which is I don't sit there and say, how do I make this happen? The best prompts, and I think the majority of them fit this description, they don't originate with a challenge, so to speak, of saying, how do I make a prompt out of this? They result more from reverse engineering a concept. So looking at some underlying aspect of a topic, like in her case, looking at various compositional techniques or even just concepts that we associate with her because she has had such a long and illustrious and beautiful career of music. Looking at those concepts and then thinking, well, how can you reverse engineer the end result of this and take it into pieces and then put those pieces in steps and then ask people simply to follow the steps to see what happens? And that's a very elegant way to have a prompt. I'm not trying to trick anyone, and I'm actually trying to lay it out in a way that most people, that regardless of their experience with music, could participate. I want it to be pretty welcoming.
Yeah, I think that's one of the very beautiful things about the Junto. You have professional musicians and you have people who just started fiddling around with apps maybe, or software or certain synthesizers. And it's all like everybody's communicating at eye level and exchanging ideas and, criticizing in good faith. And that's what I really enjoy when I listen to the pieces and read the comments in the forum. So it's a really beautiful project.
When the internet started, when the internet in the popular sense, with Firefox and all that, or I guess it would have been Mozilla back in the day, when it all started in the mid 90s, the early to mid 90s, there was that phrase, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And I think the Junto has its equivalent, which is, on the Junto, no one knows you have a PhD. There are, and I've been blown away. I started doing proper interviews with participants earlier this year. We've done 25, I think, so far. And I had no idea how many PhDs we had. I mean, longtime PhDs. We have at least one person who studied with Morton Feldman. But on the other side, just like you said, there's a lot of people who have been, just getting into it because they started playing guitar or piano at midlife, or they have an iPad and realize, oh, I can make music. And people come to it from lots of different ways. And you can't just connect someone's experience with the output. It's actually just about them feeling connected to the project and committing themselves to it and spending time on it and trusting that it's worth sharing something that's half done, because that can lead to conversation. And actually the enemy of any of this work is thinking, oh, it's not good enough.
Right.
I beg of people, don't worry about that. Just post something and move on to the next piece.
Yeah. And also I think, because most of these prompts result in pretty experimental outcomes, which often, if you're making experimental music in your own home, it's hard to find an audience for your work as well. And when you participate in the Junto, it's basically a given that you have an audience. I mean, if I look at your playlists, the pieces have like 50 to 200 plays, and you get the feedback from people in the community. It's really a collaborative sharing and learning experience, which I really love about this.
There's a lot of impetuses for that, and there's a lot of ways where just in retrospect I understand why something I think worked. And one of them is that is that often the negative is actually not a negative, a perceived negative. So much as I was really thinking about this concept of music being a universal language, having a slightly different meaning than I'd come to understand it to have. Likewise, I frequently find myself at concerts most of the time where not all the chairs are full. And in fact, if you look around, you realize that at least half the people there are probably other musicians on the bill, and many of the other people are simply other musicians there. And I started to think for a while, well, that's routinely repeated as a sort of implicit critique of experimental music, that the halls are empty and everyone else there is a musician. But I was like, I don't know. What if it's great that these are musicians primarily performing for each other? And so just before we did the Junto, so at the very end of 2011, I did a project called Instagrambient that really collected this idea of musicians mostly performing for each other. And that was the best project I did from 2007 to 2011 in terms of a broader audience actually taking interest in it. So this idea of musicians recognizing each other as an audience is really important to me.
Yeah, I think so as well. Have you read Rebecca Solnit's essay, Preaching to the Choir?
No, I haven't. I'll check it out.
Yeah, I'm going to send you a link afterwards. It's exactly this sentiment of, we don't just have to try and find audiences, but it's actually important that we share and listen to each other and basically play for each other or talk to each other.
Yeah, I read repeatedly these days people complaining there's too much music on the internet, that there's no filter, and I recognize that there are downsides to the fact that there's so much out there, but tied up in those critiques is this sense I get that maybe there should be less. And honestly, I think there should be more. I think that musicians should post more and more music. And I think that not every track is intended for the radio, so to speak. Not every track is intended to be prioritized for a playlist. But the idea of producing more music and getting it out there and getting a response to it, otherwise you're just toiling on your own. And there's plenty of examples of geniuses toiling on their own and their works being discovered afterwards and it being great. But by definition, those people are the anomalies. They're not the rest of us. And I'm sure there's some geniuses toiling in our midst, but I don't think genius is the point. I think the point is, participating in a community and collaborating and learning through experience. And there's nothing better than witnessing 30, 60, 70 other people try the same thing you did, coming out with different results, and then reflecting on what they did. I mean, I just can't imagine a better way to go about learning.
Yeah, absolutely. So the results, the 145 tracks that resulted from the 3 calls that we did, centered or inspired by Eliane Radig's body of work, are available to listen online on SoundCloud. People can find them by going to disquiet.com/junto, which is JUNTO. And they're also going to be playing at the Musikfestivals Wurzelraum, which is the German word for roots room, which is going to be an exhibition space at Bern, where people can come and listen to the pieces, and we're going to print out some of the explanations and descriptions of that participants submitted. So I invite everybody who's listening to this and has the opportunity to come by to do so and to meet us there. Marc, thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to me, and I'm looking forward to next year.
No, me too. Thanks so much, Tobias, and thanks to everyone at the festival.